Okay. Welcome. I'm Lauren, your host for Ground Your Light, a sacred conversation between two feminine souls who are doing the divine work in the world today to bring healing to those who share in our experience in our exchange today. I'm really excited to really host and be in the presence of divine feminine leadership with each woman that I interview. And today I have Lauri and Lumby here with me. And I want to share a little bit about Lauri and then invite her to share in her own words about herself. And so I'm excited to have Lauri here today. She has over 25 years of experience as an educator, facilitator, spiritual counselor, and soul guide. She has supported hundreds through her one-on-one guidance, books, workshops, retreats, online classes, and community. Lauri is an author and a poet and has published 11 books, including Authentic Freedom, Claiming a Life of Contentment and Joy, and her popular novel, Song of the Beloved, The Gospel According to Mary Magdalene. Welcome, Lauri. I'm really excited to have you here. And I'd love for you to just share with others a little bit about yourself in your own words today. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to just be in sacred space together. We have a lot of touch points of common interests and a walk that we path that we walk. So I'm excited to see where our conversation will go. Welcome, Lauri.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lauren. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, so I'm not sure what do you want me to share?
Yeah, okay. Well, maybe
I feel
for,
like the bio kind of hit the nail on the head, but maybe there's
yeah.
some specific areas that you want me to share about.
Yeah, okay. Well, so I know so our bios, they're always sort of I mean, slightly contrived and they're meant to be professional and all that. But like,
Yes.
who is like Lori like that in the flesh? I know you're a mom, right?
Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah. So like,
Yeah.
who are you in the world today? What is the work that you're bringing forward?
Mm.
Um, and maybe, we can even start like what brought you to this place?
Yeah, thank you. That gives me
Sure.
some indicators. Yes, I'm a mom. I have two amazing adult. Uh, I was just told the other day that saying adult children is incorrect, but I don't know what else to say.
Makes
Uh,
sense to me.
two adult children, 27 and 25, who are the most amazing people on the planet in my mind. And so that's the mom part. Beyond that, who am I and what am I in the world and what am I doing has been kind of this ongoing moving target, except not. Like there's been a common, um, I guess I would say there's one specific anchor point that really guides everything that I do. And to give word to that today, I would say that that anchor point is being love. Like, how
Mhm.
am I called to be love in the world? And in order to even ask that question, I've had to do the really deep work, as you know, of um, doggedly going after all of those areas within myself where um, I had been wounded or experienced trauma or had non-loving conditioning that was part
Mm,
of my formation that has prevented me, continues to prevent me from being fully love in the world. And so it's an ongoing unfolding because that work of being love within ourselves is never done. And um, and that work of being love in the world is always imperfect, because we're always
mm,
coming at our interactions from that place of woundedness, the places within us that continue to be wounded, that are still wounded, that maybe we haven't unburied yet.
mm,
And so that unburying piece is um, what I have done for myself, and ultimately what defines the professional work that I do. So whether I'm working with people one on one in spiritual direction, mentoring, or if it's in the online courses that I've developed or some of the books that I've written, they all focus on that deep question of, where have I forgotten love? Where have
mm,
I forgotten that I am love? And how can I begin to heal and transform that? Um, and providing resources and tools to help people do what I have done for myself.
mm, mm. Okay, so I'm not sure. Like, I hope this is okay to go in this direction with our conversation. And I know we've
Yeah,
touched
wherever.
on it a little bit when we talked last, because you, if I recall, had an experience of being in the church and then kind of pulling out, but you still have those beautiful currents of truth and love,
Mhm.
as you just stated. And as a spiritual director, I'm wondering, have you experienced maybe more and more need in the area of like deconstruction and reconstruction with your clients? Or I feel like um, in a lot of communities I've experienced where many people have maybe thrown the baby out with the bathwater and have sort of just completely separated from God altogether because
Yeah.
of religious wounding or even spiritual
Hmm.
wounding. And how does spiritual direction, how is your own experience helping people to reconnect with that relationship with God, or even an understanding or a new
Hmm.
lens? Is that an area that you've kind of worked with clients around?
Yeah, I think that is probably one of the most significant areas of work. Um, and kind of from I guess several different perspectives. I was raised Roman Catholic, and um, interestingly, the majority of the people that find their ways to me were also raised in a Catholic tradition. Um, and if not Catholic, some sort of mainline Protestant tradition, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist. Um, and and they come into their connection with me from different perspectives, because some people are so wounded that, like you said, they've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. They don't even want to hear the word scripture. They are immediately throw up the roadblocks because I use scripture in all the work that I do.
Mhm.
They immediately throw up the roadblocks. They um, protest the use of these resources. Then there are those that, probably a lot like myself, who really loved aspects of their religious background, but that there were certain things that um, they had made a decision, I can no longer be a part of that in that way. So maybe the institution they were in um, had doctrine rules that they couldn't believe in, or they were um, anti-LGBTQ, or they had presented some sort of non-loving human behavior that made these individuals no longer want to be a part of it. But there's still something in them that really loved what they grew up with, whether it be a nostalgia or something that truly spoke to them. So people are coming to me from all different places within that woundedness. Um, and, my job is really to meet them where they're at and to allow for that woundedness to be there and to support people in finding their own truth in spite of the woundedness. So I think probably one of the most concrete examples, I had a student, this was many years ago, who had been raised in a mainline Protestant environment and had some extreme wounding from that experience. And, when I first introduced scripture as one of the resources we were going to be using, they were, vehemently opposed. And I, basically was like, okay, I said, I get where you're coming from. I honor and accept the woundedness that you're experiencing. And I'm inviting you to trust me in this. Take a little risk and let me provide you with another way of experiencing scripture. And they were able to be present with scripture because of the way that I present it. And, I right off the bat tell people I'm not using scripture to present doctrine or dogma or to tell you what to believe. I said, we are using this as, I think Parker Palmer calls it the third way. It's here's a piece of written literature. And it might be poetry, it might be myth, it might be some version of reflective historical narrative, it might be gospel, which is its own genre altogether, it might be song lyrics. And I provided them with a specific kind of spiritual practice where they can read through that passage with an openness to hearing their own truth. So how is the divine communicating to them directly through that passage? And it just really is a profoundly fruitful way of being with scripture, because it's not about what the church says. It's not about what we've been told or conditioned to believe about a specific passage. It's about, where do you see yourself in this story? And how is this speaking to you? And so, for example, tonight I'm leading a class and we're using, I don't remember the exact citation, but it's in John's gospel, and it's a story of the man born blind being healed in the temple, and this argument that happens between the Pharisees and the religious authorities and Jesus and the man and the man's family. And it's all of these different individuals arguing about whether this man was actually healed or not, if this was just a trick, if Jesus was the devil, if, it's this whole argument that's happening, and it's about, what do you see? And how are you seeing it? And are we able to see with our own eyes, or do we rely on what we've been taught by somebody else to determine what we believe to be true or not? And so it's really this great story of, here's this amazing thing that happened to this man, and here's all these people arguing that it's not true. that he must still be blind, even though he can see. Jesus must be evil because he healed on the Sabbath. It's this whole
Mhm.
conversation. And um, so it's okay. So, where in your own life have you been led to believe that something is a certain way, but you've had your own personal experience that suggests that maybe it's not quite what you were told? And what are you going to believe? Are you going to believe what you were conditioned to believe? Are you going to believe what the outside perceived authority tells you to believe? Or are you going to believe your own eyes
Mm.
and trust your own experience? So it really brings us into that place of our own personal growth and development, and ultimately self actualization, which
Mm.
is, yeah, we have our own eyes. We have the ability to see truth and know truth and identify truth. And sometimes it's different than the truth we've been told to believe.
Yeah, powerful, powerful message.
Yeah.
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 Mm. Yeah, and I think that it's such a life-changing um knowing
Mm,
that we do have that, not just like the authority, but like we're designed
yes.
to have that truth, that wisdom, like uh um sort of, it's like this detection mechanism, call it intuition or gnosis or whatever, but it's like it's wired in us to know
Yes.
truth. Yeah.
Yeah. I call it our truth barometer.
Truth barometer. I love that. Yeah. Because that's why I think you can sit in church and you can hear messages that really like just feel right. Like that feels
Yes.
like truth.
Yeah.
Then you can also hear things that are like, that, like, how do these two
Yeah.
actually meet? Like, so there's this weird dichotomy that happens sometimes when you sit in church, because you've got someone telling you what to believe and how to
Yep.
interpret, and and what the meaning is, and then you've got your own intelligence and relation to God saying another, and it can be very confusing.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And along with that is, I haven't had this experience personally for quite some time. So maybe I've exorcised that demon. Um, but there's also this conditioned shame that happens where, um, as we're growing and developing internally, and we're beginning to glimpse our own truth, and again, our own truth that might be very different than what we were raised to believe or what we were told to believe, there is a fear and a shame that arises just in the acknowledgement of that truth, of that new truth, because there's this, whether it's overt or implied, threat of banishment, of non acceptance, of, um, it's, you're going to be abandoned by God, you're going to be abandoned by the community, you'll be abandoned by your parents. Um, and whether that's been spoken or unspoken, there is a visceral response to the threat of that. And along with the confusion is that, um, very somatic experience that, um, really tries to keep us in status quo and obedient to the outside perceived authority, whatever that might be. Um, and we have to find our way through that. And um, and that finding our way through is, you know, probably a lifetime process for many people. It's, we have to unravel from all of these layers of conditioning that the deeper we get into that well of conditioning, the more subtle the conditioning is. And the palpable feelings about shame and punishment and guilt, all of those things are so beaten into us, and in that beating into beats our own truth out of us
Mhm.
and our connection with that truth. I remember being not punished, but shamed for my intuition. And times in my life as a young child where I knew things that I knew things. Like it was so, no, that person's a liar. This person has evil intentions. This is false. That can't possibly be true. I would have these very visceral responses to untruth or truth. And I remember sharing those feelings, whether that be with a parent or a teacher or a pastor or one of the nuns at school or whatever. And, being told, you can't think like that. You can't believe like that. You can't possibly know that. And no, I do know. But the non recognition, the non acknowledgement, the dismissal of that really, I think, creates in us a reluctance to share those truths again, and definitely creates doubt within us as to whether we should trust those truths or not.
Mhm. The complexities of being human are so fascinating, really,
Mm-hmm.
that, and how we prioritize things based on a survival need, maybe even
Yep.
because I think the need to belong
Mm-hmm.
and like even through sort of tribal conditioning
Mm-hmm.
over overrides that internal truth or the intuition. Like it's interesting how strong that need is in
Mm-hmm.
us to
Mm-hmm.
belong or to not disappoint. Like I think there's that too,
Yeah.
especially
Yep.
feel like that's really strong in women are one of our generational or ancestral like woundings through the collective field of the feminine is the need, like this desire to not disappoint others, to
Yep.
you know, um, to measure up to what their needs are. It's part of caretaking in a sense. Like we'll
Mm-hmm.
self-sacrifice in order to make peace around us. And
Right.
yeah.
Right. And that's, one of the things that I've discovered in doing that work is that there's, I guess I'll say, there's two kinds of belonging. I think that from a survival standpoint, it's the reality that as a species, we thrive in community.
Yeah.
And if not in community, in cooperation and collaboration. And there's a necessary component in that in order for us to not just survive, but also thrive in this world. And so that to me is like the biological drive. That part is necessary and important to the survival of the species. But then there's the twisted, I guess I'll say the distortion of that need. So we talk about the distortion of our survival needs in authentic freedom. This is another one of those distortions, is the need for belonging. And that's where that cultic, um, what's the word I'm looking for? That's where that cultic need thrives. And, the because it's not real. Like we're not going to die if we're no longer part of the Catholic Church, for example.
Mhm.
we are not going to die because we've left our friend circle, because that friend circle proved to be unhealthy. We're not going to die if we disappoint somebody because we've chosen our needs over their needs. And so there's this distortion of a very real survival need that then is used to manipulate us into um, agreeing with the rules of that cult, if you will.
Mhm.
Um, Agreeing to the threats and the manipulations that are part of that cult, being afraid of being banished because of all of that. And I remember when, in my own personal journey, when I became aware that I'll back up a little bit. One of the things I've experienced in my own journey is that when different attachments, different pieces of conditioning are ready to be healed, they become really prevalent. Like it's in my face. And I remember when the belonging piece was in my face. And that is always an invitation to me to say, okay, is this an attachment? Is this conditioning? What can I do to move beyond this? What can I do to free myself from this distortion of a true need?
Mhm.
And so, what I've done in the past, and this is exactly what I did with the belonging piece, is I entered into a diligent practice specifically around belonging and acknowledging that it was an ego attachment and that it was something that was part of my conditioning, and used specific practices to unravel from it. And I'm at the place in my life right now where I'm like, I don't need to belong to anything. And I'm okay with that. I also know that I have a circle of healthy relationships and friends and acquaintances where I don't know if belonging is the right word, but there's definitely a sense of community
Mhm.
in those connections, and a connection that is not codependent, which is what this distorted belonging would be, a codependent kind of relationship, but something that is interdependent and mutual and reciprocal and honoring and supporting. So, yeah, that was a wormhole. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I actually the thing that kind of comes to my mind as you're sharing that is um expansion in the non-distortion belonging or community
Yes,
that yeah that brings us into more like unity consciousness where we can
yes,
be together but not have to be the same, whereas in
yes,
like the more of the cult mentality is where you don't feel safe if someone else is different, has different
yes.
thoughts. It's like everything has to be the same beliefs, same dress, all that. And
Yep.
it's different than a simplicity, that you might find in a monastery. We'll
Right,
go
right,
down the
right.
path, but this is, yeah, there's more of an attachment, and it keeps
Yes.
us, I believe, limited from our unity consciousness. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. Because in that kind of closed community, it inherently creates a us versus them.
yeah.
And either you're in or you're out. And in order to be in, these are the things that you have to fulfill. And if you don't fulfill them in this way, then you're out.
Mhm.
And that's not what unity consciousness is about. Unity consciousness is um, the sameness would be a mutual honoring and respect of our inherent God-given diversity.
Mm, mm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I like that definition a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
because we're not the same and we shouldn't be the same. We're not made to be the same. We're made to, again, humanity thrives in diversity.
Hmm.
And when we take the time, and this is part of my Magdalene training, is, taking the time to uncover the reality of unique giftedness and to identify that we need this diversity in order to thrive as a species. And so instead of resisting that diversity, instead of fighting against it, it's how do we make this all work together? How do we support each individual in coming into their own giftedness and stepping forward into that giftedness, knowing that in doing so, that will be of benefit to the community. And that just makes the community richer and more beautiful and subject to growth and creativity and um, as opposed to something that would be static and status quo and kind of embedded in this inability to move or grow.
Hmm.
And yeah, yeah,
Mm. Yeah. And I love that. I feel like the women that are feeling strong connections to Mary Magdalene are really discovering the importance of their uniqueness,
yeah,
their soul gifts, and that as a collective rising of the feminine, there's this incredible support around lifting other women up because of that uniqueness. And I think that that's just such a beautiful unfolding that's happening.
yeah,
It's a real example of what I see as the true beauty of humanity.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, so, you know, within that topic of belonging and how we can sort of be pulled into some of the distortions, um, is part of devotional life. I feel like there's like some various threads that we could maybe go down. And I was thinking one could be we could talk about healing, um, and then maybe even go into like you could share with us maybe sort of your daily devotional practices or your lifestyle. And and so if it's okay, I'd love to share a little bit about from your book, Authentic Freedom,
Yeah.
as we sort of, begin to ease around the ideas of areas that need restoration within us and a deep self-witnessing, authentic witnessing, where we can learn to restore the parts of ourselves that are not in fullness and are
Mm-hmm.
living through that distortion. And it's interesting. I mean, that can take different people, all sorts of different places. And
Mm-hmm.
as you just mentioned, that needing to belong in certain distorted communities or, cult-like mentalities is something that I think we can get um, entrapped in when there's
Mm-hmm.
a part of us that isn't whole.
Mm-hmm.
So this is from the sort of the beginning part of your book. It's called The Core Truth and the Seven Sacred Truths. And it says, hidden within Jesus's teachings and ministry is the one or the core truth that Jesus came to reveal, that which Jesus promised as the truth that shall set you free. It is living this truth that we experience a life of authentic freedom. Unfortunately, most of us do not know how to access this truth. And instead, we suffer from what I have come to call uh, and understand as the one spiritual or the core spiritual wound. Sorry, that's me not having glasses when I should. Um, that is the source of the seven core fears and their resulting compulsions. The good news is that out of his deep love and compassion, Jesus left behind a myriad of tools to help us heal from this core wound and its resulting fears so that we can enjoy the fullness of life. In fact, Jesus's teachings can all be boiled down to this one core truth that we are one with God, and through that oneness, one with each other. I
Mm.
love that last part. That's so good.
You. Thank you.
Yeah, and so in Lauri's book, she has this beautiful um this chart that highlights five different aspects or this the seven core fears and their pathways to virtue. And it just I was speaking with Lauri and she said this is really just divinely come through. But it's such a treasure. And in a way so simple because I feel like these these seven deadly compulsions are things that really we can all get entrapped in pretty easily. Like they're just part of our human nature, but things that when they go unlooked at can really kind of take on a life of their own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so maybe I'll just read through the seven, and then we can, and then I'll let you just kind of riff wherever you want to take
Okay.
this. So the first one, and I don't know if is there an order to them? I think maybe I'm not sure if they were written in order or not. Like if there's not like a hierarchy necessarily, but there's like the first one is
The beginning is the end and the end is the beginning.
right, right. Gluttony, lust, wrath, envy, greed, sloth, and pride.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got to work on a few of these.
Yeah, and it's when to bring it back to my book and the course that I teach of that same name, it's um, I'll put this in the context of my own Catholic upbringing. So, um, part of Catholicism is the sacraments, and one of the sacraments is reconciliation, where um, you're required to go in, confess your sins, be absolved, and sent on to hopefully not sin again. Um, and those seven compulsions are technically called the seven deadly sins. And I don't use the word sin because there's so much garbage around the idea of sin. And the idea of sin implies that you're bad, that you're bad. It implies punishment, or at least there's a threat of punishment. Again, it goes back to that belonging question. There's going to be, you won't be loved by God anymore. You won't be loved by your family, your community. You'll be plunged into eternal damnation, blah, 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 blah. And it always frustrates me. It still frustrates me that the sacrament of reconciliation is totally missing the point, because it's you tell your sins and then you're sent off and told don't sin anymore. But there are no resources or tools given to the petitioner, if you will, to help them heal from what creates that compulsive behavior in the first place, which was ultimately the question that led me to the development of authentic freedom is, okay, here's these outward behaviors, you know, envy, wrath, uh, sloth, pride, gluttony, greed. You know, here's these outward behaviors. We can see them, we can touch them, they're tangible. But they're not independent of themselves. They're not. Um, how can we say that the behavior? Well, we turn it a different way. To me, those behaviors are symptoms of a wound that is asking to be healed. So a person that is gluttonous, and the way I define gluttony in the book is over or under overconsumption or deprivation, because all of these compulsions exist within along a scale. And so if you are taking more than you need and not sharing your excess, if you are acquiring wealth, for example, way more than you would ever possibly utilize in your lifetime, there is something inside of that person that is wounded, that is causing them to act in a gluttonous manner. And excuse,
Bless you.
excuse me, um, where was I going with that? Okay, so and so what is it? What is the wound? How do we describe that wound? And I describe the wounds using fear as a term. So here's our 7 deadly fears. And the first fear, there's not enough, is the fear that when we exist with that fear within us, then we will act out in gluttonous ways in some way. And so the goal is not just stop the behavior. Like, I'm not a huge proponent of behavioral psychology because it says just stop doing that. Well, that's easier said than done. We can't just stop doing something if there is a wound that's driving the behavior and that wound continues to be unhealed. When we do the work of identifying what the wound is, its sources, and do the work of healing that wound, then that compulsion just becomes no longer necessary. Like, I would no longer have, if I'm able to heal that fear of lack, that fear that there's not enough, then there would no longer be a need for me to act in gluttonous ways. I would not need to um, hoard. I would not need to accumulate. I would not need to stockpile. Um, I would be able to take what I need and share what's left. And it would be the natural unfolding of what I believe is our truest nature, is if we have more than we need, we share it with others. But when we're in that place of fear, then we want to keep it all to ourselves. Yeah.
Mm.
So that's just one example of the way that the system works. It's about looking at the outside behaviors and saying, okay, so if this is how I'm compelled to act, what's the fear in me that's causing this compulsion, and how can I do that work of healing
Mm.
that fear so that that compulsion is no longer necessary?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. And then I love how you also incorporate, multi-layered understanding of this and how it relates to the root chakra,
Yeah.
power center, where we can feel unsafe or unstable, um, that ungrounded,
Hmm.
unsupported, that's where like the root is where we feel like all our basic needs are met.
Yes.
Um, and then you have a section that says seven sacred truths. So the truth around, your belief that you're in lack is, and I'm just going to read from the book, your divine source meets all of your needs in abundance. And so I like how you kind of bring it back to like it's sort of like you're reorienting to um to truth, to love, to
Yeah.
God. And like, yeah, it's just so beautiful. And then we can understand like what the core values are. Like what are we really working towards? And you wrote temperance, kind of like that word. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's living in that place of balance, taking what we
Hmm.
need, sharing what's excess, um, learning to live simply.
Yeah.
We don't need a 14 bedroom mansion with, you know, 16 bathrooms and two
Hmm.
swimming pools and 7 cars in the driveway. I mean, this is a belief or maybe a wish or a hope. Um, you know, when we're in tune with the natural way our world works, and if we're in tune with our highest nature, the world will provide us with what we need, not what we want, what we need.
Mm.
And when we are operating at our truest nature, we are able to utilize those resources in a way that is equitable for everyone.
Mm.
And then everyone's needs are being met, not just the few. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
But it
I love
takes a
that. And I
lot of
love how,
healing to get there.
yeah. I love how you bring it back to nature because nature is like the most perfect example. And,
Yes.
if we can just embody um, really the the microcosm of the universe in our own, microcosmic system, like it just, I think we would just have an easier time.
Yes.
And like I
Yes.
was I was walking through my neighborhood, which is really just, your average suburb neighborhood, and I saw like one of the homes along the walking trail that they were tapping their maple tree. I'm like, well, that's an odd thing in the neighborhood, but very cool. But I'm
Yeah.
also thinking about, I wonder, can the maple tree really like it's we're taking from the tree? Does the tree have enough to give without us,
Mm.
harming the tree? And I was like contemplating on that for a while, like what's fair, what's in balance there. So when you were sharing this, like I do think that is what creator designed like so
Hmm.
um amazingly, is that yes, we are to take and give and to give and take in a way that's harmonious. And
Yes.
that is something that we have to really be, I feel like, in devotion around, because, and I say
Yeah.
devotion because it has to be very in our awareness, in intention. We have to be in deep intention around how we um, interface with one another, with our resources, with nature, our finances. And not to go on this tangent, but there's a lot of and I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. I think we all come to our desire for financial freedom from different places. But where is it in balance? And
Mm.
there's a lot of messaging around there. Oh, well, you can make 10K a month and you should. You deserve it. Like, you can do it because I've done it. Let me show you. And like it's like this luring almost as though we need this abundance of wealth. And yeah, that if it, I feel like if we're using it for good, great. But I feel like even the messaging just feels a little sticky at times. And I'm not to say that everyone is meant to walk more of like a monastic path, but I do love and truly still feel like a spiritual life is enhanced through simplicity. And for a moment, I felt like that was really just old school and like my spiritual immaturity from like the beliefs around spirituality when I was in my 20s,
Hmm.
because the messaging is so different now.
Hmm.
And yet the truth in me feels like there's there's a quality of simplicity and surrender that allows for us to be in full trust over what God provides us as out of need versus want.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we're all coming into this desire to acquire wealth out of integrity necessarily. I think a
Yep.
lot of it's still wounding. And
Yep.
this actual like this very um example that we just talked about, this set of core fears, this feeling of like lack. Um,
Hmm.
and so I let's just maybe take the last bit of our time and talk about um, cultivating a spiritual life that might be more simplistic. What is our example of that? Um, where does this desire come from? What are the benefits? How are you embodying your spiritual devotional life in this season of your life, Lori? Because we're
Yes,
always evolving and
for sure. Yes. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that that calling to live simply, um, to seek solitude, to thrive in solitude, but also to have that community to maintain connection with. Um, I that's been part of human nature, I think, since the beginning of time, because throughout history, every single culture has had its monastics, has had those that um, are separate in some way, but still part of the clan, um, who are spending time in deep contemplation, in connection with source, the other world, whatever word you want to use of that. I think it's always been a desire, a need within the species. And, historically, we can look at, um, who were the monastics throughout history and what role did they serve within the community. And often they were the prophets, they were the shaman, they were the teachers, the healers, and they had a kind of, I guess, source driven leadership role, for lack of a better word.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's within the species. It certainly isn't in everybody's calling.
Right.
Um, for me, it's been, when I look back in my life, I can see glimpses of it, even as a child, of thriving in solitude, seeking solitude, recognizing where I found respite and um, inner support. And it was all in that, for lack of a better word, communion with God, which may or may not have had a certain form to it. Um, and it's something that in 20 and 21st century society is not really something that's put out there as even an option. And oh my God, you're super weird if you decide to go be a nun, right? Um, Unless, because Buddhism is trendy in our country, unless you decide to go be a Buddhist nun and shave your head and whatever. With, no dissing that. I'm just saying that,
True.
there's
No, it's true.
acknowledging the trendiness of that
Yeah.
in our culture. And so it was always, for me, it was never a question. I always knew I wanted to be a mother. I always knew I wanted to raise children. I never had a calling to be a nun. I um, was in a sorority in college, and I definitely no longer have a call to live in community with 60 other women. Done that. So, for me, it's been finding, not really finding my calling finding me.
Mm.
And
Mm.
and a lot of the way that it came about for me was just self-awareness, understanding who I am and, like, what's my Myers-Briggs, what's my Enneagram temperament, what do these things point towards, what do they help me to know and understand and accept about myself. And strangely, the biggest push has been chronic illness
Mm.
and freedoms that I used to have and take for granted I don't have anymore. And after an appropriate time of grieving the loss of those
Mhm.
came, I guess I'll say, the compulsion isn't the right word, the drive to ask a deeper question. Um, if not this, what then? Or
Mhm.
what's the higher purpose of this loss? Like, what's the new life on the other side of it? And for me, it just kept coming back around and around and around to embracing a much more contemplative life than what I already had. I mean, I already had a life pretty anchored in my practice. And um, in the last 14 years, that's just become increasingly true. And yeah, so it's unique to, um, I think it's unique to the individual's journey. I have a lot of women that come to me talking about this longing to build monastic or at least intentional living communities with other women. And um, absolutely, I support them in that. I'm like, yes, I said, but I won't be there. I'll be sitting in my living room on my Sheldon couch, and that's going to be where I will be living out my contemplative
Mhm.
life. Yeah, and in the way that I serve the world.
Right, right. And I think that, the beauty of living in the modern times is that we're redefining what the monk is, the
Yes.
or the nun. So, there is the invitation to um embody the archetype of the nun, the monk, but also
Mhm.
live in the world, not necessarily in the monastery.
Yes.
And what does that look like? How do you create that? You're creating your sacred space, your life that's including more contemplative time,
Mm.
um, time for solitude, more stillness.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that I'm also experiencing a lot of women who maybe don't necessarily um, desire that as a lifestyle,
Hmm.
but want to integrate that into their life more. How do you um, learn to retreat or withdraw from the
Mm.
busyness of the world without just the challenge that it is? It's really hard to push the pause button
Hmm.
when you're the busy mom or you're working full time and momming, or
Hmm.
um, there's a real challenge with the technology that we're so entrenched in. How do we pull ourselves away from that when work is always accessible to us?
Hmm.
We're accessible to work all the time. Like it's harder and harder to unplug. Um, especially if we're trying to create this some of these rhythms of
Hmm.
retreat in our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a work in progress ultimately. For
Hmm.
me, I have a very well anchored and well defined, well, not well defined, well anchored daily practice first thing in the morning. My first hour, I know that's that. And there are times throughout the day where if I'm called, I will pull myself out of what's going on and enter back into that practice. There's also what I did not make up this term, someone else presented it to me. It's active contemplation. It's
Hmm.
going about our day to day lives, going about our work in the world, and allowing that to be our prayer,
Yeah.
allowing that to be our practice. And everything is, from that perspective, everything is here to teach us. I work part time at a ballet studio, and it's every day there's an opportunity to be in practice. There's an opportunity to learn something. There's um, a piece of remaining woundedness will show itself to me,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to decide what to do with that. It's life is our teacher when we allow it to be. And so, from that perspective, then everything becomes contemplation. We can watch movies and TV shows, and they can be teachers for us. It's like I've heard several people say this. I feel like the Matrix movies was a teaching manual,
Right.
it's, yeah. Um, so there's always something there to teach us. And there's also, you use the word, I think the word you used was access or availability. This is something that just came up this morning for me, and it has to do with some things that I'm transitioning. And one of the things I'm becoming aware of is, and possibly I need to discern some more around this, discerning that question of access. Like, how easily do I need to be accessible to other people?
Mm-hmm.
Um, do I need to be as accessible as I sometimes am? Um, am I being invited to pull back on some of that access and availability? And um, and what does that mean? And are there places where I'm engaging where maybe I don't really need to be engaging? Like we're there's this expectation in our culture that, well, especially as women, it's our job to be available to everybody all the time. And that's destructive.
Mhm.
That's not helpful. That's not sustainable.
Mhm.
And so, again, it's another question of, our wounds that are that have arisen out of our conditioning, is this life-giving to us or is it not? And if it's not life-giving, how do we let go of that piece? How do we unravel from that? How do we untangle ourselves from this patriarchal conditioning that says you have to be available to everybody all the time and your needs are last? In fact, they don't really matter at all. Or you don't have needs. You don't get to have needs. So it's all of those things. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I love that it brings clarity, I think, for a lot of women who maybe are especially like new on their spiritual
Mm-hmm.
walk, where they're feeling like there's this separation between the mundane world and their spiritual life and their practices. And when they're in their spiritual life and doing the practices, they really cultivate this feeling of, that's pretty blissful usually, or it feels peaceful, or they feel grounded, connected, all that. And then they go back into their daily activities and just feel like the ooh.
Mm-hmm.
And often have to remind women that there is no separation
Right.
and that the true spiritual growth and maturity comes from being able to weave these together in a sense. And it's
Yes.
not because they are separate. Somehow we've created them to be separate.
Yes.
And I do love that about like, especially like the Benedictine tradition that has the practice of being in
Mm-hmm.
contemplative work. So if you're dusting, like window frames, or you're doing your dishes or folding laundry, it is a moment where you can bring presence to God in the action of your daily activity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have opportunities all the time, in every moment, in every breath, to really walk that path.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I also can appreciate the challenge for those looking to deepen into their spiritual walk, because you kind of touched on that, like it can bring you to a place where when you are reflecting and making sense of where your life is at now, and sometimes being called to pull away from particular activities or relationships that have been part of your life and your lifestyle, can be a difficult place. And it's just like even recalling my own experience as like a high schooler.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a meditation practice at 11 years old. So I think I had this, whether it created my way of being or I was just always that way, I'm not sure. But I always felt like a bit of an outlier because I wasn't really interested in the crowds. I was more introspective. But the way that it was perceived by
Mm-hmm.
others was very like it wasn't a good thing. It wasn't an accepted thing.
Yep.
And so it's interesting that still, even today, when you want to make the choices to do what's right to keep you in your spiritual alignment with, to keep in your orientation with God, to create, God, to put God in the center of your life. It can be really challenging in social
Mm-hmm.
groups and settings. I mean, even as much as like, parent groups or, that kind of thing. Like when are not wanting to engage in activities that would maybe be more gluttonous, um, it can it you're not the social norm.
Yep.
And that can be really hard and it can feel isolating.
Hmm.
Um, Yet, I think there's incredible opportunity for transformation
Hmm.
when we make that empowered choice to just walk in our own authentic, unique self, as it's unfolding,
Yeah.
unfolding like the rose. So, yeah, I don't know if there's any like last thoughts or reflections that you'd want to offer.
Well, I think just what you just said, you know, this work is revolutionary and confrontational
Mm,
because making that choice to tend to self is revolutionary. Um, Making that commitment to our own inner healing that inherently includes letting go of conditioning, defying cultural norms, saying no to patriarchal expectations. Um, that it's dangerous work because we are confronting a system that is trying to stay alive. And every time we say no, we're pulling, we're taking ourselves out of that system as its potential source. And it requires incredible courage to do this work, and strength, and discipline, and persistence, and a deep willingness to grieve,
mm,
because there is so much that we have an opportunity to leave behind.
mm,
And it is a threat to other people because many are dependent on the system. Many don't have the courage or the wherewithal, or maybe even the calling to do that deep transformational work. And so I think a natural part of that experience is that feeling of isolation and being different and set apart in a sense. Um, but I will continue to say that if we truly want to be free, then we have to liberate ourselves from everything that infringes on that freedom. And it's not easy work. I mean, it's really not. And that there's a reason why um, many are resistant to the work. Some get to a certain point and then quit, or say, okay, I've done enough. Like I'm content with where I am right now. And it's okay. Not everyone is called to be as insane as I am and do this work to this level. um, yeah, and it's like I've said sometimes, if well, you are familiar with the Matrix movies, it's like, okay, the life of the blue pill is a hell of a lot easier than the life of the red pill.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Mm.
So I have compassion for those that aren't called to this path.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And we honor where everyone is
Yes,
in their
exactly.
journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. So, Lori, if people would like to connect with you, what is the best way to do that? And is there any particular like offerings that you have going at this time, or what, and other than your beautiful books, yeah, how can people experience more of you?
Yeah, I always, the first step is go to my website, and that's lauriannlumby.com. And, I've got, I think I have 30 online courses that are up right now that are all, at your own pace, at your own speed, in your own time. So they're self-directed, if you will. Um, my books, my one-on-one mentoring services, and if they really want to get in the deep well, it's my Magdalene formation training, because that really goes. It's a year and a half program of really deep personal development and transformation. Um, but my website has all that, and that's always the best place to start. And I also have a YouTube channel, which is listed on my website, and that's a good way to get a lot of free examples of some of the things that I teach, some of the things that I work with. I think that's a good way for people to, I don't know, get my vibe and decide if it's for them or not.
Oh, great, Lori. Well, thanks so much for
Yes, thank
all
you,
this
Lauren.
beautiful wisdom. Yeah. And I hope that yeah, everyone can receive the richness that was shared here today. So sending you all love and thanks so much, Lori.
Yes, thank you.